Welcome back, everyone. This is Mr. Brain, your friendly neighborhood gaming dad, here to talk about what I believe to be one of the strongest epic commanders in the game, as well as one of the most versatile commanders in the game. And I do mean that sincerely, despite this commander being an infantry based commander. And that is Charlie, the Prophet. Now, I'm going to do this hero breakdown in my usual manner. I'm going to go over their skills, how they should be used, good talent tree build for them, and what commanders you should be pairing them with in order to get the most out of this commander. Without further ado, let's get on to his skills. Now, I'm not going to be able to split up the primary skill from the awakened skill in this case because it's harder to read the difference between them. So we'll just go with his awakened skill. Now, his awakened skill is fairly easy to get because you do get Charlie relics for free in this game just for participating in the game. I believe you get these from radar events a lot of the time alongside of Maxine relics. But all in all, Charlie is a fairly easy commander to awaken. His first skill is deals damage to up to 5 enemies in a fan-shaped area, damage factor 4,000, and recovers 50 rage for every target hit. Now, as much as I am going to split this up into both parts because both parts are equally amazing. The first part is the fact that you have a purple commander that can deal over 20,000 damage factor if he's hitting 5 enemies. And I say over because he does have buffs to his attack. So I believe this places him squarely in third place for overall damage dealt. If not third, then fourth. I believe the only commanders that come close to dealing this much damage are Lee, Lewis, and Chun, if I did my math correctly. Otherwise, a purple commander takes fourth place in overall damage dealt when you factor in it hitting 5 targets. That is insane. It would be great if it was by itself, but part 2 of this skill is even more broken, in my opinion. Recovers 50 rage for every target hit. This alone makes Charlie the greatest rage engine in the game, even slightly better than Lewis. Lewis has a great fourth skill in that every basic attack gives you 25 rage. After 8 seconds, that's an extra 200. So you are taking off quite a bit of time for your skill cycle with this, but it's not a straight 250 for hitting 5 targets like Charlie's is. This is a flat 2.5-second reduction to skill cycle without anything else factored in. It is huge. So not only are you getting that 20,000 damage factor, you're getting it a lot faster than you would with any other commander. Onward to skill number 2 is a very standard skill, infantry squad defense of 18%. Nothing to scoff at. It's pretty standard for a purple commander to have this kind of buff. It's not the 30 or 40% you get from legendaries, but it's something. Third skill, increases infantry squad attack by 12%. Again, fairly standard amongst purple commanders to have buffs like this. When attacked, has a 10% chance to reduce enemies' damage by 10% on the next turn. Meaning that you'll probably get this every 6 to 7 seconds, since it can only be triggered once in 6 seconds. Now, that 10% chance is likely not going to activate enough for you to truly notice it, but when dealing with swarms and stuff like that, as Charlie is wont to do, you will see this enemy damage reduction happen just enough that it makes a very slight difference. And having that additional squad attack on top of it will help you get a little bit further ahead in the troop gap. the amount of troops you have over your opponent. And skill number 4, when garrisoning, increases squad HP by 20%. Again, fairly standard. It sucks that it's stuck to garrisoning because, as I'll explain later, this isn't the greatest garrison commander, but it is something. A lot of infantry buffs in here, so it's pretty standard to see him as a primary tank for infantry commanders, or at least as a secondary to a primary tank. But as far as how you're going to use him, he is a rage engine, meaning that if you want a commander to activate their uh, active skill more often, putting Charlie with them in group combat makes the most sense. You can put him on a garrison as a secondary, and he will do fairly well. I would not put him as a primary, simply because I think there are better talent trees for garrison commanders. Specifically, the defense tree is amazing on garrison. But as a secondary to a garrison commander, absolutely. Plus, his AoE damage will keep anyone from getting too close, especially if you don't have well upgraded commanders such as Lee or Lewis to cover that AoE for you. You will see Charlie a lot in open field as a buff or support commander for someone that is just trying to push out a lot of Lee's debuffs, or maybe even Alex's buffs, just to try and get them for their allies as much as possible. But you should be leaning into Charlie's rage generation almost more so than the damage that he can deal. Now, as far as his talent trees, like I said, you're going to be using him more often than not as a secondary. But if you want to use him as a primary, if you're trying to get the most out of him, I would suggest going for a split between infantry and skills. You do not want to use him as a primary commander on garrison, so avoid the garrison tree at all. This was me currently running a test on having Charlie lead a Dut in Arena while I was still leveling up a Dut. So I went with a full infantry tree, but I will likely be changing that from infantry over to the skill tree just to get that additional rage buff. Yes, there is the law of diminishing returns when dealing with rage increases, but this particular skill, if it activates within the 5 to 6 second window of Charlie's skill cycle, it cuts an additional second off. And it's one of the only skills capable of doing that. The extra 60 to 100, 60 or 120 for 2 commanders takes a second off. Charlie's active skill takes 2.5 seconds off, and he only needs just a little bit more from his other skills to round it out at a 5.5 to 6 second skill cycle. Meaning, if you paired him with Lee, you're getting that debuff every 6 seconds when it's a 2-second debuff. Now, as for pairs, if you don't have Lewis, Lee leading Charlie is really not a bad idea. Running 99% infantry, getting that good attack buff plus Charlie's infantry attack buff, having this massive debuff, hit an enemy only for Charlie's 20,000 damage to follow up right behind it, and then it come back around again within 6 seconds is a lot of damage. Say you already have a good damaging combo and you need a bit more tankiness, or if you need a primary tank for Arena, I used Raigoro and Charlie in arena as my swarm tank or my baiting tank for a good portion of the game until Thunder was unlocked. The amount of counter damage and shields that these two commanders put out when being swarmed by 3 or 4 people is pretty ridiculous. They aren't going to give you the most damage, but the amount of survivability these two have when combined together is more than enough to compensate for that. I've found that Raigoro Charlie as a baiting tank can outlast a lot of other builds that people might try and use. And in the way that I play Arena, if my Raigoro Charlie outlives your floating troop, I'm likely going to win that fight. Some other options, you could run any other infantry commander with Charlie on all infantry and do fairly well. I'm currently running Charlie with a Doot to try and get a little bit more damage out of her, because as you can see, I don't have her as well skilled as I would like, but I do love that squad defense buff for 3 seconds and her pretty nuts single target damage. Boosting that as much as possible is beneficial to me. She's not my primary damage dealer, but I needed a little bit more damage output for Arena. Now, if you're on a budget, you can pair her with other AoE commanders outside of infantry, like Freya and Akemi that I mentioned before, and get quite a bit of damage out of her. I would actually have Charlie lead Akemi. Well, actually, Akemi lead Charlie in this case in order to have that damage hit 3 squads, reduces travel speed, and then having an additional 16% damage on top of that, just to boost Charlie's AoE damage a little bit more. Freya doesn't have the same boost to that, but if you boosted her instead of Akemi, perfectly fine to do that. Basically, Charlie is the most or the second most versatile purple commander you can use in this game. And he can pair with a lot of different commanders to surprisingly good efficacy. So you're not really going to go wrong with putting points into him to try and awaken him earlier than you normally would. You can always trade in your relics when Island Raid comes around and try and get some of those legendary or not universal epic relics later on. So awakening him early isn't going to hurt you too much anymore. And with that, that concludes my breakdown of Charlie. If you have any questions or content ideas, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. And with that, this is Mr. Brain, your friendly neighborhood gaming dad, signing